Hello, everyone. We are live, and it's another week in sunny South Africa. We've had a few cloudy days, but it's hot anyway. It's African summer, of course. So we have two announcements that we have to deal with in South Africa today. The last one actually happened, I think, just a few hours, or the first one happened just a few hours after our podcast of last week aired. So that was the third quarter crime statistics by they still call him the acting Minister of Police, but he's basically the Minister of Police, as is the former Minister of Police. We have two. That happened last Friday. And then the other big announcement was the budget speech by the Finance Minister this week. Both very interesting, both interpreted, I would say, by the mainstream as positive. I think there's some truth to that, but of course hidden beneath some opportunistic politicking. So that's what we'll be getting into this week, and of course we're joined by Leigh-Ann Hallak to go take us through the crime stats and share her insights on those specifically. This is one of Leigh-Ann's kind of big interests, so thanks for being here with us, Leigh-Ann. And I think we'll go to you first, just on kind of the overview and what maybe your initial takes are on these announcements.
Well, thanks for having me on the show. It's great to be here with you guys again. I did notice that there's by and large, there was a decrease in most crimes, but it was marginal. I think for murder, there was 700 fewer crimes than previous quarters. That is a tiny drop in the ocean. Let me also just say that I don't believe that the crime stats are accurate. SAPS, by their own admission, has released a statement saying that they have omitted the crime stats for women and children because previous quarters were incorrect, which doesn't give me much faith in the rest of the crime stats. We also know that crime in South Africa is generally massively underreported. If you take the WITS research that they conducted a couple of years ago, they said only 1 in 9 rape cases are reported. So the situation is much worse than what we are led to believe. So if we just take rape cases in 3 months, that's from October to December 2025, there was 11,430 rape cases reported. So if you take the 1 in 9, it's probably closer to about 100,000. Then we've got attempted murder. That was 7,858. It's about 87 per day. Assault GBH, 50,253. That's 588 cases reported per day. Trio crimes, which is carjacking, house robbery, and business robbery, was 12,812 cases reported. Murder was 6,351, which is 71 per day. Just to give you some context, South Africa's murder rate is about 42 per 100,000. The US is around 5. So even if we don't trust the stats, it's bad, and it's likely much worse. A lot of South Africans have also given up reporting crimes where there's no financial incentive. If you don't have insurance, you're probably not going to go and report your phone missing or stolen, because you're going to sit there for hours and be faced with someone with a deadpan expression. Maybe he doesn't even have a pen to take down a statement. You've got to spell everything phonetically. It's a mess. So the situation is far worse than what they are making it out to be. I've also seen some tweets from the likes of Fikile Mbalula saying we've turned the corner on crime. I don't know. I don't see the corner. It's quite bad. And I think South Africans do need to take the crime stats with a pinch of salt, but also prepare accordingly.
No, absolutely. Thanks, Leigh-Ann. David, what's your initial thoughts on these revelations? Are you inspired by, as Fikile says, turning the corner?
Yeah, look, I'm not as expert on matters of crime and security as our guest Leigh-Ann here, but I think it's very important to look at the data and to be empirical about it. But also, I think there's a lot to be said for anecdata, just how are people feeling about something like crime, and the fact that we live in such a high crime society, I think still pervades many of our social interactions. And, you don't see people taking down the big electric fences around their properties or leaving their car open whilst they pop into the shops to buy something. So, I mean, these might sound like silly, far-fetched things, but, if you go to a country like Norway or Switzerland or Mauritius, or South Korea, this is what happens. I mean, I once went to South Korea and I was using the train, and somebody said to me, no, just leave your bags over there. And I'm like, no, I'm South African. I'm holding on to my bag for the full duration of this train trip. There's no way I'm letting that out of my sight. So maybe that's not the kind of level of specificity that you're looking for. But I think what's very interesting is this point that Leigh-Ann raised, that can we actually trust the reporting data? And I think there are reporting biases. I mean, if you think of something like sexual crimes, there's a lot of connotations to that. If you're a woman who's been victimized sexually, that's going to be a very traumatic experience. And if you now go to the police station and you're kind of treated with suspicion and, treated with indifference at best or hostility at worst, that's going to have a chilling effect on your willingness to report that crime. And then also, I think the ability, and I think Leigh-Ann kind of alluded to this, the ability of the prosecution services to follow through on crime reports or charges, I think is really deterministic of people's willingness to report the crime in the first place. Because, if somebody steals the hubcaps off of your car, that kind of sucks. You're going to be a few grand down replacing those. Is it even worth going to report it at the police station? Maybe you'd do so for an insurance claim. But there's no real hope that you're ever going to see any justice for that. And that's for the minor crimes as well as for the major crimes. I think they're probably, I think reporting on murder numbers is usually higher statistically, just because there's usually a dead body that gets found, unfortunately. So that tends to make that data quite accurate. But I think, like for nonviolent crimes and other things, there tends to be a lot of noise in the data. So I think it is good to have a bit of a skeptical approach to some of this data. I mean, I think it would be remiss of us not to mention our Section 12 campaign, which we ran in 2024, really trying to elevate crime as an electoral agenda item. I mean, I think it's quite striking that if you had to meet somebody from overseas, say America or Britain, and you introduce yourself as being from South Africa, one of the first questions they're going to ask you is, what's the crime situation like there? That's unfortunately, crime has become synonymous with life in South Africa. But if you had to be a Martian and you had to study the political discourse of South African politicians, you would think that there isn't really a crime problem in South Africa, because nobody really seems to be talking about it except for people in those specific portfolios. And unfortunately, my worry is that we've become inured to violent crime, that it's just become an everyday feature of life in South Africa. And I don't think it has to be that way. I think it's some of the challenges that are facing the police force are simple to solve. That doesn't mean they're easy to solve, but they can be solved. And I'd be keen to hear what Leigh-Ann has to say about some of that. But let me hand it back to you, Martin.
Yeah, thanks. Look, I think what you mentioned there, kind of almost in passing, is about anecdotes. It reminded me of probably my favorite quote by Jeff Bezos, who said that when the data and the anecdotes disagree, the anecdotes are usually right. And I think we have that back to front kind of in the policy world, where often it's kind of seen as a logical fallacy or something to elevate an anecdote. And I understand the kind of reasoning behind that, but I think there is some wisdom in saying that, listen, if you have this data coming out, kind of saying, oh, crime is down, but all the anecdotes are like, no, actually, let's take the example of the Daily Maverick report very recently saying that the whole police service in Gauteng is controlled by a criminal syndicate. Just about a year ago, very dramatically announced how the police all over the country and in KwaZulu-Natal as well are basically in the pockets of organized crime. Now, these are anecdotes. They weren't presenting data, but these are important anecdotes. We shouldn't ignore the data, but the data is very malleable in a way that unfortunately lay people don't necessarily understand. There is this idea that, well, the numbers don't lie. Well, how you present the numbers necessarily makes it that they can lie. As Leigh-Ann said, if they're just not publishing a lot of the sexual offenses data, then to the layperson reading the report, it's as if those crimes never happened. The underreporting of rape, I mean, that's a shocking number, but still they reported on modest declines in rape rape instances in South Africa. How could they say that, knowing that rape is underreported? They cannot say that. They shouldn't be allowed to say that. I should go as far to say they need to just say rape is one of the most underreported crimes in this country, and because of that, we can only tell you what a minimum number of rapes are happening, but actually the number is far higher than that, and that's something that many South Africans actually live and experience. So it's quite an opportunistic event for them to present this as a change. And I think what a lot of people are pointing out, and I know in some contexts we say that the absolute doesn't matter, only the direction of travel is key. Like in South Africa's economic freedom numbers, if our economic freedom is not too bad now, but we can see it's declining over time, we say that, well, don't look at where we are now, look at where we're going. I understand that. But when it comes to crime, our absolute numbers, as Leigh-Ann alluded to on murder, I mean, I think we're regularly in the top 5 of homicidal societies on the planet. Sure, if the direction of travel is down, it's great. But still, the absolute numbers are still emergency levels. And David, as you said, it is a wonder under those circumstances that it's not being treated as an emergency. Now, I mean, we've criticized the DA before, and they told us, no, we take crime very seriously, and the Freedom Front is a law and order party, and the ANC always talks about how we're going to tackle crime, and they say all these things, but all the solutions that they have to violent crime are usual things that wouldn't be out of place in Sweden and in the UK and in Brazil and whatever, when we are in a very unusual situation. And that is what Section 12 is all about, is to say that we have to treat this event as a special event that requires special solutions. And that's why we said we need decriminalization. We need a lot more additional correctional capacity. We need decentralization is the big thing that never comes up, and so on and so on of policing powers. All these things are special solutions to a very unique problem that is not being given its due attention. So these are kind of the things that have to be borne in mind. And I think we have one great ally in Parliament, at least, who is Ian Cameron. He's the chairperson of the Police Portfolio Committee. And he tweeted this, which of course sent people up the walls, as it always does. And he said, the state must never have the monopoly on your safety. And what does this mean? Obviously, this means that you should be able to defend yourself freely if you need to do so, and you're in trouble. As Gideon Yubar, one of our other friends, often says, you are the first responder to your own emergency. The state is if you're lucky, maybe the 4th or 5th responder. So if the state takes away, as they want to in time, takes away our right to arm ourselves, to defend ourselves, to form neighborhood watches, to form private security companies, then the state will have that monopoly. It wants that monopoly, but it mismanages that monopoly entirely. It cannot keep South Africans safe, and specifically vulnerable South Africans. I mean, it's everyone who can afford a private security company now are lucky, but there are tens of millions of South Africans who are just exposed to this scourge of violent crime, and they are the ones now being told, "Don't worry, we're dealing with it." And this has always been my bottom line, especially on the performance of the GNU, but kind of transcending that as well. It's that we cannot declare the victory in data or in stats without something first changing. We cannot say, "Oh, the data shows that we're doing a good job, crime is going down," when nothing has changed in the way that you fight crime. Because then you need to be like, okay, the data might not be pointing us in the right direction. We need to be told we did X, and therefore, as a result of that, the crime levels are going down. But there is no X. It's just business as usual. There has been no decentralization. There has been no new injection of young, new special detectives that came through a special academy that are now ready to attack this thing head on. No, all the information that we have, again, Nhlanhla Nene, the Daily Maverick report, are that the criminal justice institutions in this country are collapsing. And now we're meant to believe this. So no, we need to know what has changed if we are to believe this. And no, nothing in our view, well, in my view at least, really has changed, other than, as Ian alludes to, the state actually trying to gobble up more of that power to be the supposed monopoly on public safety in South Africa, which is dangerous. So yeah, I think I'm gonna give both of you another opportunity on this one. Then it should take us to the half-an-hour mark, and then we'll head on to the next topic. Leigh-Ann, give us some more of your thoughts. Sorry, you're still muted.
Sorry, Martin. Just to come back to your point about changes and solutions from politicians. They always tell us that the answer is we just need more boots on the ground. That's the slogan that they go with. But it's simply not true. It's a myth. We have about 150,000 police officers, which is more than most developing nations. It also takes up a large part of our annual budget. It's the SAPS gets allocated 110 billion rand per year. It's funny that the more police officers that they employ and the more money they throw at this thing, the worse it is. So that's simply not the solution. We have extremely low conviction rates. Now, the biggest issue with crime in South Africa is that justice is a chain. And every single link needs to be in place to secure a conviction and put someone behind bars. Now, some of our conviction rates are as low as 2%, for example, for trio crimes. How many criminals are roaming the streets? For murder, it's 15%. It's the whole problem is that from when you report a crime, straight through the process, you are met with challenges and hurdles. Either the court case gets delayed, or the cops that eventually, when they come to the crime scene, they don't have forensic kits. There's no rape kits at a lot of stations. There's all these problems. Eventually you get to court and they need to postpone it. The one case that Action Society just handled, I think they eventually secured a sentence. The one case was postponed 40 times over a period of 4 years. So even if everything, you've done everything right, you've collected the evidence, you've done everything, the chances are that case might not see sentencing because of witness fatigue. Witnesses are intimidated. It's a big problem. You need to put people behind bars. It doesn't help, because this is the other thing about politicians, right? They always brag, and they always start the crime stats off like that. They say, oh, we've had this many arrests. Arrests mean nothing if you can't secure a conviction. And I think it is foolish of us to believe that the state is coming to save us. They haven't, and they're not going to come. And it comes back to your guys' point about decentralization. And you need to take responsibility for your own safety and that of your neighbors. That is all that you can do. You cannot rely on the state. They are not coming.
Absolutely. And I think the key thing here that I mentioned last time, but I'll keep mentioning it just to offend people, is that we need more prison capacity. Like the numbers you just mentioned, Leigh-Ann, it's like, imagine if we had enough prosecutors, we had the courts, everything was working like a nice conveyor belt machine. But where are we taking these people? The prisons are already overfilled. Like, where are these people going? So yeah, I mean, there's so much actually simple things that still need to happen. David.
Yeah, just on that point of prison capacity, I think some of the local and provincial governments are sleeping on an opportunity there. During our campaign for Home Rule in 24, Martin and I, one of the arguments we made was that provinces need to start building their own prisons. So yeah, if Dr. Peter Groenewald is listening, he should get together with his friends in the DA in the Western Cape and start building more prison capacity. Yeah, so I think I want to go back to Ian Cameron's tweet, because I think that that's so important, and I don't know if it was people willfully misunderstanding him in the comments in response to his tweet. But he says the state must never have the monopoly on your safety. And, there was a very wonkish policy person who responded, saying, no, but the state has a constitutional mandate in terms of Section 2053 to protect our citizens. We should not have to live in fear or need to arm ourselves. Private security shouldn't have a monopoly over our citizens' safety, et cetera, et cetera. It's like, well, yes, there is this piece of paper called the Constitution, and the Constitution is sovereign over our judicial system. But, the state simply does not have the capacity to deal with violent crime. And moreover, I think that really misses the point. Ian Cameron's point there is it shouldn't have a monopoly on your safety. I mean, we often remind our listeners that the core function of the state is the protection of life, liberty, and property. So police services fall squarely within that, and the state should have that capacity, and it should be developed. We often make policy proposals to cut this department and remove that department, get rid of half the ministries, but we always leave in safety and security as some of the core functions of the state in our policy proposals. So, and Ian was very quick to point out that he didn't suggest that we should privatize the police, although some among us might think that's actually quite a good idea. So, look, I think the point is that, and Leigh-Ann just made this comment now, you actually have to take responsibility for safety and security in your home, in your neighborhood, and in your broader community. And boy, that is quite a difficult thing to do. When you're asking people to join a community policing forum or a neighborhood watch and actually go patrolling at night. But, we had an event at our offices a few weeks ago, and one of the people who attended said to me, "Oh, I have to get going now because I'm joining my neighborhood watch in my precinct, in my neighborhood, and we're doing a joint patrol with the SAPS." And I think that's an example. This is a professional person. He has other commitments. His time is valuable, but he's got skin in the game, and he values the safety of his neighborhood and his community. So, and not everybody can do everything. You can't be running around picking up litter from the river and filling every pothole and then going on night patrol all at your own expense. But I think the principle is there. It's how can you find scalable alternatives to this state dependency syndrome that we seem to have cultivated in South Africa. And that's very necessary and important. And, particularly in light of the fact that we have a history and a record of state capture in South Africa, where politicians are very close to criminal syndicates. There are many reports of police working in conjunction with criminal syndicates, selling them their weapons, for example, or confiscated weapons. Unfortunately, that's the reality, is that the police have been compromised. And And so even if you had a squeaky clean police, like nobody but saints were allowed to join the SAPS, you still wouldn't want to have them having a monopoly on the use of coercive force and violence. You need that diffusion of coercive power throughout a society, and that's why the right to bear private arms is so important. Martin, that's all I want to say on that, but maybe you want to just talk about that last point around the proliferation of private arms. And I think, you're quite a big fan of the American Revolution. And I mean, that was one of the ingredients that enabled the founding fathers to defend their life, liberty, and property from their colonial overlords. But yeah, I don't think we have time to discuss it today, but there's also legislation which seeks to control and limit people's ability to lawfully own a firearm. And I just think that's self-defeating. And it shows you that actually the state doesn't actually want you to protect yourself when they do something like that. They want to have the power and control. So people often criticize us and say, oh, you're just kind of anti-state and you're caricaturing the intentions of the government. But no, well, look at the actual conduct. Would a government that cares about your safety and your rights do something like that? And it's a deflective action. They have failed to uphold law and order, and then they're putting the blame on peaceful citizens who just want to protect themselves. And that's really not on, and we should be pushing back very assertively on that, as people like Ian Cameron and Gideon Hubert have done.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So it's the firearms amendment bill is back. It's it comes about every 3 or 4 years. Then it gets rightly shouted down by civil society. And this is one of my favorite issues because it's one of the rare issues where there is no seeming racial dimension. Thank goodness. There is cross-cutting civil support by gun owners and non-gun owners for the natural right. We have no constitutional right to bear arms, whatever. The natural right of people to have their own firearms. And the only ones who are against this, as you say, David, is the state, because they just want the power, the only organized force in the country. And secondly, a very tiny, minuscule group of very well-funded activists who are actually pushing this kind of legislation. So it's been defeated before, specifically due to the efforts of people like Ian Cameron, Gideon Hubert. Leigh-Ann has also played a vital role in that, and I'm sure it will be defeated again. But as you say, David, we do need people to stand up. This is deep, I don't know, primordial natural right is that of the individual to defend themselves and their family. This is not a right that can be taken away, even if the Constitution says that no one shall own a firearm. That would be an invalid provision. You definitely have a right to defend yourself. And Professor Koos Malan, who is a member of the FMF's rule of law panel, he, in an article about a decade and a half ago, really said this out very nicely. He said that your right to help yourself, to defend yourself, increases to the degree that the state's ability to defend you collapses. So maybe we can say, okay, so in Sweden isn't as safe as it used to be, but maybe let's say Switzerland, maybe there you don't get to own a machine gun, even though you're probably required to own a machine gun, given that they have conscription. But that's because if you call the police, within 20 seconds, there will be a cop car in front of your house. In South Africa, that's not how it works. In South Africa, you call the police and you will wait days sometimes. We had an incident of fraud at the FMF several years ago. We made a police case against it. I don't think we've heard back from the cops in all those years since then. So no, there is a desperate need for people to defend themselves in this country, and that means we have to fight against the Firearms Amendment Bill. And the FMF has set out the simple, what I would say, solutions to these and other issues in our Liberty First project, which brings forth some of those Section 12 solutions. And we would encourage everyone who thinks that crime is this unsummitable problem that we just continue to face, I would encourage you to please just have a look at our Liberty First initiative, which we'll mention a little bit later again. But you'll see that actually there are real tangible solutions. They don't require constitutional change. They don't require these radical things. We just have to use existing resources in a more rational manner and empower existing structures to act against crime, empower communities, empower businesses, empower local governments, provincial governments, and so on to also play a big role in this. These are all things that can just happen. They can just be done, and we're very keen on that at the FMF. But I think that's it for that topic. Let's move on to the other big thing from this week, which was the Enoch Godongwana's budget speech, which actually, I mean, for the first time in many years, I'm not completely despondent about a budget speech. Still lots of problems with this budget, but at least it's a slight change in pace. David, I think you can give us maybe a high-level overview of some of the things that the finance minister announced.
Sure, Martin, thanks. Look, we are a bunch of grumpy libertarians, so we want to see state spending slashed and burned. So we didn't quite get that, but we definitely didn't get an acceleration of spending. And I think there is a real genuine commitment by Treasury, by Finance Minister Godongwana and his two deputies to really stabilize debt, to reduce the size of the deficit, and to also, very importantly, rein in inflation. And I think last year, there was a commitment by the Minister of Finance and the Governor of the Reserve Bank. They had differing opinions on this for a while, but they managed to come to terms to lower the inflation target. So the previous inflation target was a band between 3% and 6%, but now they're going for a single point target of 3%. And the 2025 estimate is looking at about 3.2%. And then through the medium-term expenditure framework, the next 3 years, 26, 27, 28, that's going to be hovering around 3.4, 3.3, 3.2%. So, look, I think that's very important. And critically, they're also looking to control the budget deficit. So when you talk about the budget deficit, there is consolidated expenditure. So that's overall expenditure, which includes debt service costs. And then there's the primary balance. So on the primary, which excludes debt payments, there's actually a primary surplus. So of looking at about 1%. So I think that's really positive. And then when we're talking about debt, the debt to GDP ratio, the relationship between debt and the overall size of the economy, that's looking to stabilize for the first time in about 17 years at about 78.9%. So that is very high compared to previous levels. So like in the mid-2000s, when growth was pumping and government spending was much lower, that debt to GDP ratio was only at about 26%. And then it really aggressively rose during the Zuma years and expanded. So I think whilst we want to see that coming down, I think the first step is stabilization and then start to reduce that. But look, I mean, we're still spending about 400 billion rand a year, about 430 billion rand a year just on paying debt service costs. And actually, if you had to break down all of the spending items, so there's different buckets of spending. So education and health are very large. I think education is the largest line item, or the largest category, spending category. But if you had to actually break that down into kind of subcategories, you'd still see that debt service costs are actually the largest expenditure item in the budget. But yeah, look, I think that primary surplus of about 0.9%, so just under 1%, they're looking to see that go up to about 2.3%. And then the budget deficit, they're wanting to bring that down. So that's the overall budget deficit from 4.5% in this financial year down to 3%. So that, I think, can potentially have positive momentum, that kind of overall government spending can start to come down. But look, there's also some tailwinds that have benefited us, like commodity prices. There's been a weakening of the dollar as well. So there are some factors that have helped us. I would argue that actually we could have benefited and reaped the rewards of the commodity cycle a lot more if we had a much more conducive environment policy-wise for mining. So look, I think we are still leaving much on the table. And I think generally speaking, the fact that we're having a primary surplus, I think that's a very, very good start. I wouldn't say that that there's no more work to be done. This is really, I think, the initial steps of a consolidation phase. And we at the Free Market Foundation are very much focused on limiting the size and scope of the government. So I do have to say, though, that one of the big enduring structural problems with the budget is that it is still very highly redistributive. So, I mean, the government is spending 2.3 trillion rand. It was raising about 2.3 trillion rand in tax every year, and is spending 2.7 trillion. So there's that 400 billion rand deficit. So the government is still technically living beyond its means, even though it is making attempts to rein in spending. And basically about 800 billion of that 2.7 trillion is going to paying civil service costs. And the other kind of breakdowns. So I think my takeaway is that taxpayers are still very much carrying the burden of the fiscal requirements. I mean, we have about 7.7 million assessed taxpayers. So there's many more, about 28 million or so people who are registered with SARS, but you have to be registered with SARS even if you fall under the payment thresholds, the tax thresholds. So really, when you look at the size of the tax base, it's really only 7.7 million people. And technically, in terms of Stats SA data, there are only 7.7 million people formally employed in South Africa. So there are actually not very many people. That's incorrect. I mean 7.7 million unemployed people. So there are more unemployed people than there are people who are assessed taxpayers. And so there's those ratios are skewed. I mean, we have about 28 or 29 million people who receive social grants, and that might not be that much money that they receive, but they're still ultimately dependent on the state, and the state is dependent on taxpayers and on borrowing to finance that. So, I think there was some relief for taxpayers. There was an adjustment to some of the income tax brackets. There was an extension of the VAT registration thresholds. I think it's up to 2.3 million now, or 2.4 million. And also tax-free savings thresholds were also increased as well. So that incentivizes South Africans to save and invest more. But look, ultimately, what we want to do is be starting to reduce the overall tax profile. I mean, corporate tax is still very high. It's like 28%. That's higher than many, many other countries. If you were to incorporate a company in Mauritius, for example, you'd pay 15% flat corporate tax rate. And so I think we need much more policy liberalization and a bit more creative thinking. And I'm willing to bet that lowering the taxable thresholds would actually improve overall tax collection. I mean, right now we kind of have the situation where SARS is very aggressively coming after taxpayers, making life difficult for tax professionals in terms of trying to reclaim refunds and rebates and so on from SARS. And I think it is unfortunate that the most efficient organ of state is actually the tax collecting authorities. We actually need to make life easier for taxpayers, and I think that would actually help with revenue, because people would feel like they're not being as attacked as they currently are. And if there's a genuine willingness to reduce the overall tax burden, I think that would go a long way in terms of encouraging not only goodwill, but also freeing up latent capital in the economy. And people would now have more discretionary money to spend on other things, on their business, on employing somebody, on investing their excess capital, and that would help to stimulate economic growth. So I think overall a good budget, stable, not terrible, but I think we do need to see much more creativity in terms of and willingness and political will to start reducing the burden on taxpayers. And we only have to look across the Atlantic at our friend Javier Milei, who has reduced government spending by 30%. I mean, that's the kind of scale that is actually required. And simultaneously, he's deregulating the economy. And I think that's really what gets the economic juices flowing. And I think, this is good. There's some modest restraint and consolidation, but we need to go a lot further.
Absolutely. Thanks for that overview, David. Leigh-Ann, you, I think, watched the budget speech, and the VAT threshold adjustment jumped out. What's your thoughts on that? Do you have any small business owner people in your orbit who have started popping the champagne?
Absolutely. I think for me that was a very good move by the finance minister. I think a lot of small business owners, including myself, we are relieved. It hasn't been adjusted since 2009. So I mean, to reach that R1 million threshold that it isn't very difficult if you adjust for inflation. So very relieved. But you also know my take on tax. Taxation is theft to me, so I say do away with all of it. But definitely is a relief. I do think that taxpayers are definitely still being squeezed. We all feel it. We're taxed left, right, and centre. I mean, we even saw an increase in sin tax. Now, the government spins it as something like, no, we want to, we just love you and want to take care of you and your health. And I don't know if you guys have ever met someone who said, guys, sorry, I stopped drinking because of the tax. Said no one ever. So the same with smokers. They'll move on to cheaper or illegal cigarettes eventually. You're not doing anything for the taxpayer by increasing that. But generally, I think it's pretty decent. Obviously, like as David mentioned as well, cabinet can be reduced substantially. I think the Free Market Foundation, I think you proposed 9 or 10 ministries. So that could definitely decrease. But overall, I do think, though, that things like, if you take Sona, for example, they spent 7 million rand. And I think I posted it a couple of weeks ago, and I said, if we have money to spend 7 million rand on a speech, then we're being taxed too much. So, I think a lot of it can be cut, and a lot of it is wasteful.
No, absolutely. I mean, it shows that there is something of a conflict within the government, which is always a good thing. It shows that Treasury has some sober minds kind of operating. Whether they're the senior people there is a different question, but these people do understand money a little bit better. And I think a lot of the credit for why NHI hasn't just kind of rolled out on a red carpet yet is probably due to a lot of people at Treasury saying, listen, great idea, but we can't afford it. And to me, the thing that stood out was that the medical income, the medical tax credit wasn't abolished. People have been, our opponents on the left, these irritating little activists, have been yelling for this thing to be abolished for years now. They write these thought pieces where they say, this is what the finance minister needs to do so we can fund NHI. We need to stop allowing people to deduct tax because they have private medical aid. And actually, apparently, I don't know, maybe I read wrong, but apparently that has also been adjusted for inflation. So I mean, is that not an indication that some people in Treasury kind of have their heads semi-screwed on, right? I don't know if I should give him credit, but Ashor Sirupan, Deputy Minister of Finance from the Democratic Alliance, I know him, great guy, friendly guy. We've had some spats in public as well. But unfortunately, the only reason I don't know whether I can give him credit is because, I mean, David has made this point often, is that everything is now opaque happening in cabinet, and we don't actually know who is making the decisions, who is pushing for reform. But yeah, if I had to kind of put money, kind of make a bet who it was, it's probably Ashore who played a big role in that. And Godongwana himself, even before the GNU, wasn't, I mean, he's not a libertarian hawk or anything, but yeah, he was good for what you can get in South Africa. So yeah, I'm pleasantly surprised at this, especially the personal income tax inflation adjustment. This is something that they hate doing. Like I think it happened in 2023, but like even before that, it was very rare for them to make that adjustment. The tax-free savings account, that's big. It's about 100,000 rand more over your lifespan that you can invest in these accounts, which is great. And I think I encourage everyone who doesn't have one to open such an account. But as David says, and I think this is what it does come down to, and if we don't bring it back to this, then I think we're missing the point. And that is that spending has to be cut. And a lot of people immediately say, "Oh, you just want to take away grants." Well, no. Eventually, yes, but you don't have to start there. You really have to start with civil servant salaries. That is the plurality of our budget just being gobbled up by some of the most inefficient, incompetent, inept, inert, and corrupt people walking the face of this planet. There should be no reason why we're paying so much on civil servant salaries. So thousands upon thousands of state employees across municipal, provincial, and national government really have to be fired. I'm sorry, they have to join the ranks of the unemployed, at least for a moment. We as taxpayers should not have to carry that burden, and that is the David was alluding to this about kind of the posture of SARS. It's like they're going after taxpayers hard, and maybe if they just kind of chilled out a bit, things would improve. And I think there's a lot to be said for that expectation of respect from the taxpayer. This is something that is not emphasized enough. Taxpayers just want to be acknowledged as taxpayers, not just a note on TV like these ads saying, "Oh, you're keeping the lights on" or whatever. An actual manifestation of respect. And the first thing that you can do by that is SARS kind of chilling out for just a moment. And the second big thing is stop taking the money that taxpayers labor year on year, day on day to give to the state and giving it to a teacher who doesn't pitch up for class in the most educationally deprived areas of the country. That is profound disrespect. So there has to be massive cost cutting in the civil service, and the best thing that I think has to happen is that the GNU departments that are not managed by the ANC have to start this initiative. They have to start saying, listen, I have this department. I know I always bring up the example of e-government. There's a department of e-government in the Gauteng provincial government. And we learned that there's about, I think the number was 700 people working for that department. I mean, come on, please. That shouldn't be more than 2 people in a department called e-government. So please, no, cut these people out. And I think that just scales up dramatically if you get to the national government. So take the initiative, be a Javier Milei within the small bounds of power that you might have as a reform-minded minister or MEC or MMC, depending on which area of government you are in, take the initiative in cutting these people out. I think if you really ask the question, is this person absolutely necessary for government to fulfill its mandate? The answer you'll usually come to is no, because the private sector shows that you can do a lot more with less. The example that I always mention is that there was one point in New York State in the US, I don't know if it's still true, but there is a association of Catholic private schools there. And then there's obviously the state-run education department. And at some point, the Catholic-run private schools had more schools, more students, and run by a small office of bureaucrats in this church kind of association, compared to the Department of Education at the time, which had legions of bureaucrats running a smaller number of schools and a smaller number of students. So I mean that can't that doesn't compute. And I mean, that's obviously true in South Africa today as well. We have a bureaucrat for everything, and that bureaucrat has an assistant and a deputy assistant and an assistant's deputy. All these things, that is something that is emblematic of government. So there are places to cut before you even think about touching social grants and kind of the social wage and whatever they call that. We can actually cut a lot of spending, and that is what needs to be the next step. This is a welcome step in providing some limited relief for the taxpayer, but you have to meet that with spending cuts. Otherwise, you're just creating a bigger problem down the line. David, any more thoughts?
Cutting is very important, and like I was saying earlier, you need to do it. But if you really want to solve the problem of the economy in South Africa, you have to take steps to stimulate economic growth. And that is actually, if you are in government, if you want to solve some of these spending challenges and close the deficits and so on, that is what happened in the mid-2000s, like I mentioned earlier. And if you remove policy constraints like BEE, if you shelve and chuck away expropriation without compensation, if you say, look, we want to invite international companies to come mine in this country, we want to have offshore drilling of natural gas reserves that are likely there and waiting to be exploited. This can have a fundamentally transformative impact on people's lives and on government finances. So if you have more people employed, you're going to have more taxpayers, fewer people dependent on the state. Then you have more room to maneuver. You can start lowering taxes. You can start doing that stuff. So, look, I would say the sequencing also, if you lower taxes, more people will come here. People will be more willing to actually invest and not just foreign investors, but local investors as well. But yeah, deregulating is actually a big part of this equation. And, if you consider the discussion around national health insurance, I mean, that's just very foolish and short-sighted, because if you undercut and undermine the private healthcare sector, you're actually putting this massive burden on the public healthcare sector. I mean, I think the real driver there is ideological and it's a resource play. But, if you care about health outcomes, you want to encourage and facilitate the private sector as much as you can. And you mentioned the private medical credits. That's something that actually moves the needle. And it's the case all throughout the economy. So, I think maybe there is a bit of an anchoring effect that happens. It's like, okay, well, this is what government expenditure looks like, and this is where we can maneuver, and we can maybe trim a little bit here and trim a little bit there. But actually, if we think big picture, we could really change the economic conditions in this country, and that would make the finance minister's job a lot easier. But I always, whenever it's budget year, I always think of one of my favorite Beatles songs, Taxman, and the lyrics are very, very apt for this discussion. It says, let me tell you how it will be. There's one for you, 19 for me, because I'm the tax man. Should 5% appear too small, be thankful that I don't take it all because I'm the tax man. And I'll tax the street. If you try to sit, I'll tax your seat. If you get too cold, I'll tax the heat. And if you take a walk, I'll tax your feet. And then George Harrison, who wrote this song, then goes on to poke fun at Mr. Wilson and Mr. Heath. And, during the 60s in the UK, taxes were literally like on the upper percentiles, were raised into the 90s. And, I think that it's really sad if you look at that golden era of music in Britain, that a lot of these stars that really were responsible for this amazing British cultural output, like the Rolling Stones and the Beatles, actually ended up leaving the UK and incorporating and trademarking, what would you say, copywriting their songs elsewhere, like in places like the Netherlands. And actually, the UK ended up losing a lot of the revenue that was generated from some of those songs. As the FMF, I don't think we would encourage any government to be taxing the revenue on creative output like that. But I think it just shows the short-sightedness. And eventually under Thatcher, a lot of those really restrictive taxes were removed. But you have to be constantly vigilant, because if you look at 14 years of Conservative government under the likes of Cameron and Theresa May and Boris Johnson, I mean, taxes were really high again. So, my advice to those who die is beware the pennies on your eyes, because the taxman always wants his share. But so I think let's keep up the fight for lower taxes, and I think that can really transform South Africa's economy.
Yeah, absolutely. And here we are longing for the days when artists kind of were in favor of fiscal responsibility. So here's to that becoming a thing again, and not just all of them being uniformly pro-tax. Leigh-Ann, any final thoughts from you before I close us up for today?
I think in closing, I just want to say that politicians don't love you. They're not coming to save you. They literally, all they see you as is a walking piggy bank, and they'll actually go out of their way to harm you if it means an extra rand in their pockets. So we need to take responsibility, protect our own livelihoods, our money, and our family. And that's about it from me.
Very well said. Yeah, that's a great place to end it on. And just to take that sentiment and say that, as I mentioned earlier, there are practical ways to do what Leigh-Ann just said, and it's all in the FMF's Liberty First policy proposals. Go to libertyfirst.co.za. You'll find our very practical solutions around cutting the size of cabinet, cutting the size of the civil service, deregulation, as David said, and liberalization of the economy to encourage economic activity, to broaden the tax base, to ensure that there is more money here to tax if taxing is something that you desperately want to do. There are ways to attract that kind of investment. We also have things in there about creating a conducive environment for business by taking on crime, criminality, addressing some issues in the judiciary, ensuring that there is certainty around what the policy environment looks like, rather than this constant change. One day the mining charter says this, and the next day it says this, and the next day it says this, and the mining companies just say, listen, we're done, we're getting out of here. So there are very practical solutions to these big problems that continue to plague South Africa. And I think it's good that some of these ideas, I think, are starting to trickle in to what we see in the budgets. So we would encourage all of our listeners, all of the watchers and the audience, to please take some of these ideas. And if you have a voice on social media, if you have an in with your local councillor or with a provincial representative or with a national minister or something, show them some of these things and start insisting that they need to start pushing for these practical reforms, rather than just essentially copying the bad habits that they see in places like Britain that David just mentioned, and trying to apply that in our very kind of destitute African environment. So the solutions are there. But that is it for us this week. That's an eventful week, I would say, crime stats and the budget. I'm sure next week we'll have something else in this craziness that is South Africa to share with you. Please do like and share this video with your friends. Please restack it on Substack at rationalstandard.co.za. Find our written content there as well. And please join us again next week, same time, same place, different topic, different host usually. So we will see you then. Enjoy your weekend, everyone. Cheerio.
Thanks, Martin. Thanks, Leigh-Ann.